Hi, I'm David Dool, the creator of endlessART, and in this video, I'll show you how you can easily create generative art using endlessART. endlessART is a free app for Windows, Mac and iPad, and you'll find it at the download links at endlessartapp.com. So, what is generative art? Put simply, it's art created through a repeating process, typically done using a computer. It is using something computers are really good at, repetition, doing the same thing over and over again, without complaining about how boring that is. So let's have a look at some generative art. These were all created with endlessART, and what you will see is features that are common to a lot of generative art: the use of lines, shapes, random and sequential placement, and interesting or random use of colors. But this is really just the tip of the iceberg with what you can create with generative art. Okay, so once you've downloaded and set up endlessART, this is what you'll see at startup. The little logo, and then the start screen. Okay, so you'll first see this welcome screen with the starter mode and standard mode. It really doesn't matter which you pick. The first time you use it, you might go for starter mode, as it just presents you with a few less options. Okay, so in we go, and once we've selected that, we can pick one of three templates. So the templates give you a little bit of code to get started that you can then modify and change as required, or complete reset. So we'll start with the first template. A little bit of a loading screen, and then we come in. So this is the screen for designing stuff in endlessART. At the top, we have a repeat block, and this repeat blocks, everything contained within it will be repeated what it's set for, which is 250 times. So we'll add a shape, and each time it repeats, it'll keep adding that shape, and then it'll do the other code block, which is changing the color of the shape. So let's have a look. So the shape it's going to add is a transparent square. So, and the size and width are just 100 and in a random position. These are all just default settings, and we'll get into them more in a moment to understand how they all work. Okay, so the other thing that happens in our code is changing the color for shape 1. So each new shape it adds in, which is going to do 250 of them, you could do a random color, fixed color, or from a palette. And we've set it to a palette, so it'll pick between red, blue, and yellow. But there's a whole bunch of different palettes you can choose. We'll look at those in a few moments. So what happens when you press play? This is it. You press play, and it will repeat 250 times, showing randomly red, blue, or yellow squares. And there you have it, your artwork is created. Nothing amazing, but it's something. And it's very simple. It's really just 2 blocks of code in a repeat loop, repeating 250 times. Now we could change it to a different shape. And what will happen? It'll repeat that same shape 250 times. So let's do an outline of a triangle, and we press play, and now we get 250 red, blue, or yellow triangles. Remember, the default setting for the shape was to put it in a random position. But you can pick any kind of shape you want. Like you can just scroll through. There's a whole heap there that you can choose. And the start position is random, so anywhere on the screen. But you could set a specific start position, and we'll have a little look at that in a moment. By default, though, it'll be set at a size of 100 and 100 and a random start position. With the color, we can change the color palette if we wanted to. There's a whole bunch of different color palettes. So let's say pick red, and then it will randomly pick from one of those 4 shades of red for every time. So there we go. Lots of randomly placed triangles in 4 different shades of red. Can't really see a lot of difference there because the reds are fairly similar. All right, and then you can drag code blocks from the left-hand side and add them in. If you've ever used something like Scratch or any other block coding process, this is how it works. You can just drag them in, or you can just click them and it'll add them at the bottom of the list. You can have many, many more than one shape, but to begin with, for explanation purposes, we'll just start with 1. Okay, so we've gone to the second template now. That's the one in the middle with swirly lines. Now, to simplify things this time round, first of all, I'll just show you what it's going to be doing. What shape is it adding in? There it is. the outline of a square, right? So it's going to add a shape, outline of a square, width by height, and this time it's placing it in the center 250 times. I'm just going to delete the rotation code block for the moment for the sake of explaining this. So all we're doing now is 250 times we're adding in that square outline, and then each time we add a new square, each one will change its size by 1 width and 1 height. So each square will get slightly bigger. Let's have a look. And there we go, our first bit of interesting generative art, I think, there. Every square is being placed in the center, and each one is getting bigger and bigger. The color is, because we haven't set a color, it will go for a random color. Now this is interesting, and that's sort of a piece of art, I think. We could use a different shape, but I think it's more interesting if we try adding in a rotation code block. So this time, as well as changing the size by 1 and 1 for every square, we'll also rotate it 1 degree. So each new square will rotate 1 degree from the previous one and be one size bigger than the previous one. Let's have a look. And there we go. And I think that's something decidedly more interesting. It's starting really to look like a piece of generative art. And you can play around with this. And this is where it starts becoming really fun. You just play around with sticking in random numbers and see what happens. Let's rotate it by 5 degrees. And there we get something that's more like a, I don't know, multicolored bird's nest. Or if you put a number in that evenly divides into 360, like 45, then you should get some kind of interesting pattern. And we do. We get some kind of, I don't know, starry type shape thing. And then if you start playing around with different shapes or with colors, different rotation values, changing the size by smaller or larger amounts, perhaps changing the width but not changing the height, you'll start to get a whole bunch of interesting effects. And that's really just from the repeat loop and 3 code blocks. Now, just looking at the menu here, there's an option to click for picture that will take a picture of your screen, and the background one gives you the ability to change the background color. So on the top menu, right hand side, click on background, and you can change the background color to something else. I'll change it back to black. But there's a whole bunch of options there, and that'll give you a different result. Also, you might have noticed there was a little tab called display speed that can change how quickly the image is drawn if you're getting bored waiting for it to draw. And the templates button brings up the templates menu that we've used to get to the 3 standard templates. And so I'll click on that now and pick the 3rd template, because this does something a little bit different. This is tiling shapes instead of randomly placing them or sticking them in the center. This time we're adding a shape, and I'll just delete the rotation code block actually just to simplify the explanation. So repeating a few more times here. This time repeat has been set to 400. You can just click on that orange block to change repeat at any point. And we're going to tile a kind of curvy shape and make it a bit smaller, 40-40. And it'll tile a pattern in rows along the screen. Because we want to do that, we're going to start in the top left corner. Now, at the moment you might be wondering what that means, but there's a change position code block here, which allows you could just move the object left or right, up or down using that. But in this case, we've chosen the option that says tile shapes in rows. And that means, and we'll see in a second, it will draw that curvy shape that we saw before, but it will tile it from the top left corner in rows, again doing random color because we haven't set anything for the color. And what we get is swirly lines, which is something. Is it art? Maybe not, but it's something. But it gets a little more interesting if we add a rotation. These shapes are actually called Trichette tiles, kind of coined after by the 17th century French priest Sebastian Trichette. So what we're going to do here is we're going to change the rotation randomly, and not any random number, but it's going to pick a random number between 0 and 90. So either you'll show the shape how it normally is, or you're going to rotate it on its side. And it'll just randomly pick one or the other. And what we get is something quite interesting. We get this swirly, curvy maze kind of thing. And if you start playing around with tiling shapes and rotation, so really you're only doing two things here. You're adding a shape, tiling it, and then doing the rotation. So tiling and rotation, and you get all this interesting stuff. If we do it with a different shape, like a diagonal line, what we end up with is something that looks like a maze, which is quite interesting. And if we say we pick a few diagonal lines, we'll get a more detailed maze. And you can change things like making the tiles much smaller, although you also need to increase how many times it repeats, or change different rotation values, play around with different things, see what you get. Like let's take this sort of, I don't know, I'll call it a robot smiley face and tile that, and then we get, I don't know, is it a map of a city? Is it a weird maze? Is it art? It's something. So play around with that and you'll find there's all sorts of interesting results you'll get from tiling and then doing things to the colors, rotation, size, anything of the objects you're tiling. Okay, a little bit of a look at the menu here that we haven't looked at yet. If you select something and click delete, that will delete that little bit of code. Clicking reset will clear all the code. And save allows you to save your work so you can come back to it later if you want to. To be honest, most of the stuff you create will be fairly simple and you might not feel the need to save it. But if you do, you just click that and enter a title for your artwork. It really doesn't matter. And your name, or you can just leave it blank if you wish, and click OK, and that will save it on your computer or device. And there it is in the list of all the different art you've created, and you can delete and copy it if you need it. So that top left-hand corner menu will open up the list of things you've saved. So I can load up something else I've created before and saved. At any point, if I want to, I can stop the code, and then I can go back and load the one I created before. Yes, I did delete the rotation, so we'll just add that back in. When I was showing you that you can delete. So I'll make it back into the actual code I had. And there we go. There's our multicolored maze thing. Finally, this little menu at the top lets you close the application. Just click that and that's how you get rid of endlessART. So thanks for watching. I hope you go on to make some amazing art. If you post it on social media, use the hashtag #endlessArtApp so we can see what you're creating. And if you have any suggestions, please use the contact form on the website. Now, go have some fun.